Good morning. We welcome Rebecca Kirzner from HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant and Aid Society. She is the Senior Director of Grassroots Campaigns there. She comes to us via Alan Green. I thank him so much. And this is an important issue, not just for our Tikkun Olam committee, but for our whole congregation. And Rebecca, we welcome you and can't wait to hear what you have to tell us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with all of you and the opportunity to speak to Makom Solel Lakeside. And I know that you have all been, as a congregation, quite involved with refugee and immigration work in the past. So I kind of want to start by saying thank you to anyone who's on here, of course, Alan, but anyone else as well who was involved with any of that. Because I think, we're in a very particular moment in terms of standing up for the rights of refugees and immigrants after so much kind of change on that issue and so much news on that issue. And I really do want to say that as somebody who works for HIAS, I've been able to have a front row seat to how much it mattered that people were standing up and paying attention and making their voices heard and learning and taking action throughout so much of the past few years. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you. And also thank you to Vanessa for the introduction. So I work at HIAS as the Senior Director of Grassroots Campaigns. And in that role, it's really my job to mobilize the Jewish community in support of the rights and the safety and the dignity of refugees and asylum seekers. And what I'm going to do today, this morning, is really to just give you a run through about what the issues are that are at play right now, what the status is in terms of supporting refugees, refugee protection, refugee resettlement, what the status is in terms of asylum and the border. And because I think it's all very, maybe a bit unnecessarily complicated, but very complicated. And I think I'd love to just give you a window into it and a chance to answer questions, a chance to ask questions, and a chance to dive in a little bit into what we're currently looking at. So I'll start though by saying that, so I grew up in New Jersey. I don't know if anyone else on the call grew up in New Jersey. If so, hello. And one of the things about growing up in New Jersey is that you take class field trips all the time to the Statue of Liberty. And so I remember doing that a lot of times. And I still find myself very connected to the image of the Statue of Liberty, and feeling very moved by the fact that as you approach the Statue of Liberty by boat. I'm sure a lot of you have been before, but I find it very moving to think about the fact that, 100 years ago, my grandmother passed the Statue of Liberty on a boat, headed toward Ellis Island, and she would have seen that statue, and she would have known that it stood for the promise of America and the promise of opportunity in America. And at the time that she would have passed, the plaque on the Statue of Liberty would have already been there, which says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." And so as a granddaughter of immigrants on all sides, I was incredibly moved by that message. And so I think a lot of us in the Jewish community have stories like that of being immigrants ourselves, the children of immigrants, the grandchildren of immigrants. And I know that for many people that I've met, it kind of drives their passion about this issue on like a gut kishka kind of level. And it puts us very firmly in an ongoing Jewish refugee story, perhaps where some of us are no longer actively fleeing, persecution, but we're in a position to be able to stand up for the next round of people who are. And so we are, I would say, still in the Jewish refugee story, but just maybe in a new chapter in which most of the Jewish people are not refugees, but we can take action based on our values and history, to make sure that each and every person who is fleeing for their life can find a pathway to safety. So what I didn't understand as a kid going to the Statue of Liberty on field trips, what I didn't understand was how aspirational the words "give me your tired, your poor" were. I certainly didn't understand as a kid on a school trip that those words did not reflect US policy. US policy was not "give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses" when my grandparents were coming. There were awful immigration quotas, especially against Jewish refugees. They did not reflect US immigration practice of the time. They didn't even really reflect US popular opinion of the time. The popular opinion of the time, and that plaque was put on the Statue of Liberty in 1903. The popular opinion of the time was not inclined toward welcoming refugees. Quite a few people thought that immigrants brought disease, that they would never assimilate, that they'd be a drain on our economy, that they'd be a security risk. And I think that we all know that the exact same things are said today about today's immigrants who come to the US for the same reason that my grandparents did. They come for opportunity. Maybe they come because they're escaping danger. Maybe they come because they're trying to reunite with their family members, or, but really to start a new life. And in that way are no different than immigrants 100 years ago or 100 years before that, because it's an ongoing story, and, migration is as old as human history. So I guess it's just kind of a fact of our country that, opposition to immigration has been, also an unfortunate part of this country's history throughout every era. So when Emma Lazarus wrote those words, what she was doing was she was actually writing her own opinion, but it was a protest of the restrictionist policies of the era. It was standing up for the rights of the refugees that she knew, the Jewish refugees that she worked with as a highest volunteer. She was actually a highest volunteer. Okay, so having said all that, the poem was written in 1883, and actually Highest was founded just before that in 1881. So I'm not sure how much everyone on the call knows about the organization. So I'm just going to say in very, very briefly, we are the oldest refugee organization in the world. And we were founded by Jews like Emma Lazarus and her family, founded by Jews to care for the needs of Jewish immigrants. And for the first 120 years of our history, we did exactly that, serving 4.5 million Jewish refugees who were coming to the United States, maybe fleeing pogroms in Russia, maybe fleeing the Holocaust a few generations later, maybe fleeing religious persecution in Iran or Cuba, or the Soviet Union. But we served a huge number of Jewish immigrants coming to the country, and our estimate is that at least 75% of the Jewish community can trace their roots to somebody who was helped by Highest. Whether you know that it was Highest or not, whether they had a 3-hour encounter with someone, or whether they were helped over the course of a sustained period of time, we helped, a huge percentage of the Jewish community that came to the United States from somewhere else, which is most of the Jewish community. In the early 2000s, our mission started to change because we were faced with the very good problem of the fact that, most of the Jewish community was no longer in need of kind of immediate rescue from one place to another. And much of the Jewish community was kind of safely safely where they were. But as the oldest refugee agency, we had the expertise to be able to serve other populations of refugees. And so that's when our work started to open up to refugees regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality. And that's the work that we do today. We operate in 16 countries. And just some examples of that work. We're on the island of Lesbos, where we provide support to people who have crossed the Mediterranean from Libya or Turkey, trying to get into Europe. We are in 9 different countries in Latin America, where we are we're one of the largest pieces of the response to the Venezuela crisis. We have 6 offices along the US-Mexico border on the Mexico side. These are just examples. We work in Chad in 13 different refugee camps where we care for the survivors of the Darfur genocide. And our work is truly global. We also work in the United States to help to resettle refugees here and to help people with their asylum claims here in the United States. So our work today, what we like to say is that once we helped refugees because the refugees were Jewish, and now we help refugees because we're Jewish. And that's how we like to kind of characterize this change that happened in the organization, where we're taking action based in our values and helping the next, today's refugees. So what I'm going to do moving forward here is I think I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation and to show you a little bit of some facts and figures around refugee admissions right now, and give you a sense of what today's refugee crisis looks like. So let's see here, sharing screens. Here we go. How does that look, everybody? Can you see it? Vanessa, you're talking, but you're muted, I think.
Yeah. If you can put it in presentation mode, it will make it a little bit bigger for us.
Yep. Okay, that's up here.
Yay, perfect.
Okay, all right. You think I know how to use Zoom by now. It's been, how long has this pandemic been? Okay, so, all right. So I want to start with some kind of impossibly big numbers. So right now, there are close to 80 million people who have been forcibly displaced in the world. So this is a graphic from the end of 2019. I couldn't find someone who had created a graphic that was inclusive of last year of 2020, but the numbers just keep rising, as you can see. So it is closer to kind of 80 million or, just over 80 million forcibly displaced people worldwide. And the way that those numbers break down is about 26 million of the people would be considered to be refugees because they have crossed an international border into another country. And most of the rest would be considered to be internally displaced, meaning that they've fled conflict or violence or persecution in their home countries, and they fled to another part of their same country. So they're not in a different country. So they don't meet the definition of refugees. But still, this is an incredibly high number. And it's even higher when you consider the fact that this doesn't include, you can see here, as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, human rights violations. So this number does not include certain things. It doesn't include, for example, people who have fled because of climate change. It doesn't include people who have fled because of a natural disaster. People who have fled because of poverty, all of those things would be incredibly valid reasons for wanting to find a new life. And they're not even in this number. That's how high this number is. And it's about 1% of the entire world population who are forcibly displaced. So it's an incredibly high number. So I wanted to give you a sense of where people are coming from and where they're going. So if you look on the left side, on the red numbers there, those are the countries that are currently producing the highest numbers of refugees. Syria by far is the biggest refugee crisis, with a huge number of people who have fled. And this is out of the 27 million number. So Syria is by far the largest number of refugees, people who have fled the war there. Venezuela is shortly behind that, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar or Burma. In terms of where they're going, so that's the green numbers on the right. These are the countries that are currently hosting the largest numbers of refugees. And so there's a couple of things I want to point out about this slide that are interesting. So firstly, looking at the red numbers and thinking about the largest refugee crises in the world, I just wanted to point out how tragic it is that the US spent so much effort trying to ban Muslim refugees over the course of the past few years. Because if you look at the places that people are coming from, 3 out of 5 of these countries are, heavily Muslim countries. And certainly the refugees fleeing them are Muslim. And then I wanted to also point out another thing, which is in terms of the countries that they're going to. I mean, look at how many people that Turkey is hosting: 3.6 million, 1.8 million in Colombia. And over here in the United States, we have policy arguments and disagreements and people taking to the streets, et cetera, over much smaller numbers than that. Like we are, the US has the capacity to do so much more. And sometimes it seems really crazy to me how much we fight over, whether we could bring in 100,000 people, but we do, and it just, given how many people are in, other countries except for ours. Okay, these are the same countries, but on a world map. And I just wanted to point out that, of course, this makes sense. The countries that host the most refugees are right next to the countries that produce the most refugees, right? Because I mean, you might have been able to figure this out yourself, but people, they cross a border, right? They're on foot, they're in a bus, and they cross a border. So they are in a neighboring country. And the unfortunate reality is that so many doors are closing around the world, and so many places are so deeply unsafe for refugees that, I hear stories all the time of people who are from, maybe arrive at the US-Mexico border and they're from Sudan. How'd they get to the Mexico border? Well, first they tried to go to one place and it was unsafe and they were in danger all the time. And so then they kept running and they kept running and they kept running and they found another way to get to another place. And then they were, attacked again and they found a way to get to another place. And they spent, a decade and a half on the move until, trying to get to, perhaps like the place where we encountered them. Okay, so I'm going to switch right now to a different topic, which is the US refugee system. So rather than talking about this as a global perspective, I think I want to switch now to talking about how the US government treats refugees. So this would not be this would not be universal, and I am not the right speaker to talk to you about how other countries treat refugees or to how Greece treats refugees. I'm not the right speaker for that, but I want to talk to you about how our country treats refugees. So first, to just give a quick definition here, or quick clarification, because this is something that gets confusing in every presentation. So there's two ways to come to the United States as a refugee. So the first way to come to the United States as a refugee is called resettlement, and it's through the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. So perhaps you've heard of resettlement. Resettlement is when, just to kind of give a quick ground laying for people who might be kind of confused between resettlement and asylum, et cetera. So what resettlement is a very small but impactful program that the United States has of being able to bring people to the United States who really, really need protection and safety. So what might happen, for example, is there's a Syrian refugee family in Lebanon, let's say. I'm making up an example right now. They're refugees, they escaped Syria, they're in Lebanon, and while they're in Lebanon, they are in such extreme danger. They have not been able to find any form of jobs or housing. They are, maybe someone has a medical issue, maybe someone, has been abused or attacked or something, and they go to the US Embassy or the local office of the UN Refugee Agency, which is called UNHCR, and they say, we are in such extreme danger, we would like to apply for resettlement to the United States. And then they'd have to go through 2 or 3 years. God, I just told you they're in danger, right? 2 or 3 years of health screenings and security screenings by 5 different US government agencies until they're approved. And then the State Department flies them here to the United States with refugee status, which is a permanent legal form of protection. So they're coming here with status and having been screened through security and everything like that already. And then they're resettled by organizations like HIAS. The other way that refugees can come to the United States is that they literally just show up in the United States. They have to be within the border of the United States and say, if you send me back home, then I will be in life-threatening danger. If you send me back home, then I might die. So I'm requesting asylum. And then they have to go through a similarly extremely long process, but they are applying for the legal status once they're here in the country. So that's the difference between resettlement and asylum. So I want to say that in my mind, resettled refugees and people who are granted asylum are basically like morally the same, right? It's morally the same issue. It's people who need safety, who need protection. But the process is different because the resettlement is, most of the process happens when they're outside of the country. Once they get here, it's just a matter of, helping them settle in and helping them to find housing, et cetera. Asylum is, people who, when they come here, they do not have status yet. And so they're applying to be able to stay here, and they're trying to make their case to be able to stay here. But those are the two ways that refugees come to the United States. Okay, so to make that even clearer, here are the legal definitions. Refugee is an individual who fled his or her home country and is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin, and cannot obtain protection in that country of origin due to, as I said before, a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons related to race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So it does, and like I said before, it doesn't include due to climate change. It doesn't include, due to poverty. It doesn't include due to hunger. It doesn't include, due to a natural disaster. It's very specifically, this is the definition of a refugee. An asylum seeker is somebody who meets that exact same definition of refugee, but hasn't been recognized. They haven't received any legal recognition or status yet. They're seeking it. Okay, so there's my vocabulary lesson. So now I'm going to now to tell you about the status of both of the. I'm going to do both things. I'm going to do refugee resettlement and what's going on with refugee resettlement right now. And then I'm going to do asylum and what's going on with asylum right now. And then I'll be done with my presentation. Sound okay? Okay, all right. I'm just gonna assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're gonna have a lot of questions at the end because I do. But
okay, all right. That sounds good. So refugee resettlement, this is a chart of refugee resettlement over the course of the history of the refugee resettlement program, which was officially set up in 1980. So as you can see, in 1980, when the refugee resettlement program was set up, the numbers were much higher. They're above 200,000 in those early years, and that was mostly Vietnamese refugees. And then over the course of the program, it was actually pretty stagnant. It actually didn't. This is a pretty, uneventful curve here. It's been kind of in and around. For a long time, it was kind of in and around 75,000 refugees per year. And then, the big changes happened over here, which is 2016 to 2020, which would be the years of the Trump administration, when refugee admissions went far below. So the red line is the ceiling, kind of like a quota, the maximum number of refugees that would have been allowed that year. And the orange line is how many were actually allowed that year. So if you follow the orange line, it's pretty on track with the red line. This dip down here was 9/11. That year, there were a lot fewer refugees admitted because of security screenings, but there's still a heck of a lot more refugees admitted that year than than in 2020, for sure. So, okay, so this is refugee resettlement. In terms of right now, the refugee ceiling for 2021 was set by President Trump on October 27th, 2020 at 15,000 refugees, which was a historic low number. The average over the course of this entire graph here, the average is 95,000. So 15,000, I actually think it's heinous. I think it's horrific how many tens of thousands of people, we could be, and helping, and are not. Okay, so before continuing to talk about 2021 and our current status, I wanted to just point out that the impact of the Trump administration's decision to continually lower the refugee admissions number was not just it wasn't just like lowering the number. They also did it in a discriminatory way. It was very much, there were specific screenings put into place for refugees who were from Muslim countries. There were specific policies put into place for certain people, and the impact, for example, on Arabic speaking refugees, if you look at 2016 versus 2018, it's a huge, 21,000 people were admitted in who spoke Arabic in 2016, but in 2018 it was 288. Another example, the number of Syrians, I told you it's the largest refugee crisis in the world, was 12,000 in 2016 and only 62 in 2018, only 62 total people. So it really did have a discriminatory impact. So President Biden took office, earlier this year with a stated commitment toward refugee resettlement. I put a quote here, of something that he said in an early speech, just in terms of his commitment to refugee admissions. And I will say that right now we're in a little bit of this program it turned out to be interestingly timed, because we're in the middle of a little bit of a holding pattern to see what the administration is going to do. This is the number that he promised in his campaign that we would be resettling each year, 125,000. That would be a number that was higher than what the Obama administration had. It would be a huge demonstration of his commitment to the issue. When he took office, he started saying this number, 62,500 for this year, because he said, and this made sense, that there's no way that we'd be able to get to 125,000 in 2021. We're already halfway through it. So let's set a goal that would give us a stepping stone to be able to get to that higher number next year. So that's what he said in January. And then he said it and he never signed it. So we're, what is it? It's May 2nd. So it's been a couple of months, and it's been a couple of months with our refugee admissions ceiling still at this number, the historic low set by the Trump administration. So we've had our hands tied a little bit in terms of being able to resettle refugees, because he never signed the piece of paper that had his own policy written on it. We didn't come up with that 62,500 number. That's his policy. He never signed it. So we're in a little bit of a holding pattern. What he has said is that they will release a new number that is higher than the 15,000, and that they will set it by May 15th. So everyone watch out for that. Between now and May 15th, we've got 13 days for them to come through on that promise. But it is a little bit of a disappointment to those of us in the refugee space that they seem to have not prioritized this issue. He didn't speak about it in his address to Congress, which was otherwise amazing. He hasn't really come through on this issue in the way that he promised to. Okay, so that is resettlement. Let me pause and see if anyone has any questions about resettlement before I start talking about the border. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay. I'll take a few questions on resettlement, and then we can always come back to the questions.
Okay, can we go to gallery view and then I can see everyone? I do have one comment. It should be noted in the comments, at the end, that our xenophobic past president, who feels enormous prejudice towards foreigners as trash, criminals, etc., had his grandfather emigrated to the U.S. as a refugee and perhaps may have been assisted by Hayes. And for me, the aha moment was when you showed how many immigrants, how many refugees and asylum seekers the other countries take. 3 million, Germany 1.1 million, and we're quibbling over tens of thousands of people, and we, are the richest country and have the most resources. Okay, Alan, go ahead.
So Rebecca, while the number is unfortunately much lower than it should be as far as refugees this year, My understanding is that through about the end of March, there had only been 2,000 refugees actually come in. Is the administration doing anything to close that gap between 2,000 and 15,000?
This is a really good question. So first of all, I want to thank you for pointing that out, because there is no way that we're getting to 62,500 this year, whether he sets it tomorrow or, we have resettled far more refugees this year. Far fewer refugees this year than ever in the history of the program. And it's in and around 2,000-3,000 in a fiscal year that started in October 2020. So, and it will end in October 2021. So there's a couple of reasons why that number is so low. One of them is COVID. I think we all know that travel has not been an easy thing to do, right now. And of course the US had their own travel restrictions for a while in place because of COVID. And then another reason is because when President Trump, they played such tricks with immigration policy, but when they set that 15,000 number, not only was it a historically low number, but they also played a trick, which was that they said, out of the 15,000, 2,000 need to come from this specific part of the world, 1,000 need to come from this specific situation, 5,000 from this specific situation. And they created these categories that really not very many people were even in those categories. So when we looked at it, we were like, are there even 4,000 people who've applied through that program, through that particular program? They kind of, they limited it through these regional restrictions that made it really hard for us to even figure out who could come in. So one thing the Biden administration has done is they got rid of those regional restrictions. So we should be able to move toward the 15,000 in a much kind of smoother way. Right now we're resettling right now in a way that we weren't 2 months ago. They just removed the restrictions about 2.5 weeks ago. So that's the biggest thing that they've done. But the other thing here is that it's not really a matter of just raising the numbers, because the effects of the Trump administration policies have basically decimated the refugee program. And in particular, the overseas part of it, the part where people get put in the pipeline and screened, et cetera, that pipeline has really been decimated. And our agencies are hurting too. I mean, in total, HIAS didn't close any of our offices, but in total, about 1/3 of all refugee resettlement offices had to close over the course of the past 4 years. So there's a lot of work that the administration needs to do to rebuild the refugee program to be able to even just reach the numbers that we were doing 4 years ago.
I know that everyone on this Zoom is going to want to know, what can we do? And that might be your big wrap up of, should we be writing the White House? Should we, we're lucky, we're in Illinois. All of our Congress people and our senators are blue, but what can we do? Because this is, we knew what was happening during Trump. I've seen some information coming by that Biden is not moving on this. What can we do?
So I think that, I will definitely conclude with a bigger "what can you do" session. I think that the Biden administration is likely to, to start heading in the right direction, shortly on this. I'm definitely, we're a little demoralized at how low priority it has been for them. But I think that, hopefully it'll head in the right direction, and the amount of publicity on that issue has gotten to be quite large. One thing that you can do is actually to be in touch with Alan, who is working on congressional meetings for the various congressional districts in the Chicago area through the involvement with the Chicago Jewish Coalition for Refugees. And because we're trying to convince lawmakers and all of our members of Congress, and all of your blue members of Congress are perfect for this. We want them to contact the White House and for them to be speaking out with the urgency of addressing this issue. So it would be perfect for you to reach out to blue members of Congress right now to ask them to tell the to make it clear to the White House that this is a priority for them.
Okay. Alan, can I put your email in the chat if people want to get a hold of you? You're muted, but you said sure. That's what
The answer is yes. And actually, Diane is working right now on setting up a meeting with Brad Schneider in the 10th district.
That's wonderful.
And there are other people through this Chicago Jewish Coalition, of which our synagogue is a member, along with about 18 others, plus some other organizations. So there are meetings being set up with at least 3 other Congress people in this area. So we're trying to get that before May 15th, but whether it's before or after, we will continue to make our voice heard.
Right. So yeah, if you're interested, you can reach out to Alan or myself, Nat. We're hoping to get that meeting with Brad Schneider very soon. Waiting to hear back from his office right now. So.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Diane and Alan, for what you're doing. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go back to, we have a few more minutes, so I'm going to quickly go back and just say a few words about asylum and the border. And then, and then we'll end, or we'll do, some more questions. Okay, how do I go back to sharing this is the question. Exit.
Go to share screen, bring it up so that it's.
Yeah, got it.
It's been a year of sharing screens.
I know.
There, it's perfect. We see it. Right.
So, oh goodness.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So let me just say a few words about asylum and the border. So first of all, I defined asylum before, and I said that it was people who are seeking status once they're already here in the country. And I want to say that if there's only one thing I say about asylum, it's this first line. It's legal to seek asylum. Any way you do it. It doesn't matter how you do it. At a port of entry, between ports of entry at the border, once you're inside of the interior of the United States, at an airport, it's legal if you are picked up by ICE because you're undocumented and you say, please don't deport me. Do not send me back to my country, because if I go back to my country, I will be killed. That's legal too. These are all different legal processes, different paperwork that you have to fill out, but it's legal to seek asylum, period. So everyone, if you have anyone in your life who has ever said to you that people are illegally crossing the border because they're fleeing, they're fleeing Central America or something like that, they're not illegally crossing the border. They're seeking asylum. So I'm not saying that there's other reasons why people cross the border, but if you're seeking asylum, that is legal, period. It doesn't matter how you cross the border. Okay, off the soapbox now. Oh wait, I'm not off the soapbox. To put it differently, there is no illegal way to seek asylum in the United States. And now I can put away the soapbox. Okay. So I don't need to tell you this. You all read the news and listen to NPR. You know that over the course of the past 4 years, the border has been almost like an experimentation ground for evil policies. It just was awful policy after awful policy, family separation, keeping kids in detention centers. It's just been kind of a parade of awful things that, that have happened to people who are crossing the border, because the Trump administration really saw an opportunity to scapegoat a group of people and to say they are the cause of your problems, they're the cause of your unemployment, they're the cause. And so, so he, by going after the people crossing the border, he was able to gain a lot of political points. He also lost a lot of political points because some of those policies were horrendously unpopular. But let me just, I'm not going to go through this entire slide with you, but let me just tell you the most important current issue at the border is the first one. So right now the border is more closed than open because of a policy that's in place called Title 42, which is a CDC order actually that the Trump administration put into place. And it basically said, don't let anyone across the border because of spread of COVID. So at this point, and I never supported that policy because I think that when you have somebody at the border who's saying, if you send me back, I will die, that to me sounds like a bigger health risk to them than the slim possibility of COVID. It seemed like the priority was all wrong there. However, it is still in place, and it's even more horrendous now because basically we're sending people away possibly to their deaths because of something that we can test. We do nose swab, right, to know if people have COVID at this point. So, and we can, and certainly all the mechanisms are in place now at the border in terms of they've been quarantining people, they've been doing tests. But it's still in place. So that's the biggest issue right now at the border. And there are very few people who are asylum seekers who are actually able to cross. Right now, the only people who are crossing really are people who were in the Remain in Mexico program, which was a Trump era program that forced people to wait in Mexico for their court hearings instead of being allowed into the United States. So those people are actually now being let into the United States, which is wonderful. The people who were sent back because of Remain in Mexico. So that's one category of people who are being allowed in. And then the other category of people who are being allowed in is children. So you might have heard about a surge in unaccompanied children at the border. And that's because the Biden administration has not gotten rid of Title 42 yet. Like I said, Title 42 is the biggest issue here because it's preventing people because of COVID, but what they did do was they said, we're not going to apply Title 42 to children. So that's why you're seeing such a quote unquote surge in children coming, because they're the only ones being let in. The rest of the people are being turned away. And there's actually an issue of a de facto family separation happening at the border because people are realizing that. They're realizing that if their kid approached the border by themselves, they would be let in. But if they went as a family, then the family would be turned away together. So what they've been doing is there's been this really large number of people who are coming to the border with their children. And they say to their 15-year-old, here's the phone number of your aunt who lives in New York on this little scrap of paper. You go because maybe you can make a better life for yourself and they're not going to let me in, but maybe they'll let you in. And so they send the 15-year-old in by themselves. And then you've got all these Republicans screaming about, there's right-wingers screaming about, this surge in unaccompanied children. That 15-year-old wasn't unaccompanied. But it's what the policy of the country was. The policy of the country right now is that they're turning people away at the border. So if they would let the whole family come in, then the kid wouldn't have been unaccompanied. So I wanted to address some kind of hot topics. So right now I'm seeing a lot of news that says that there's a crisis at the border. And I've noticed working on this issue that whenever there's a lot of people at the border, the new reporters love to call it a crisis whenever there's a lot of people. So I just want to say that in my personal opinion, increased numbers of people crossing the border is not a crisis. Increased numbers, actually, I think it's kind of amazing. I mean, they were denied entry for so many years. So I think I'm pretty thrilled to see people trying to seek safety in the country and some people being able to get in. For me, what's a crisis is how they're treated. If they're prevented from being crossed, if they're prevented from crossing, if they're given anything less than a fair, just, ethical, humane treatment, that's a crisis for our country, not the fact that people want to live here. I think that that's actually kind of great. So I already said, again, I'm just going through some hot topics. Is the border open? No, the border's not open. The Biden administration did not open the border. It is more closed than it has ever been since World War II, because of Title 42, right? That's the policy that is preventing the vast majority of people attempting to exercise their right to seek asylum. It's preventing them from coming in. Why are more people coming? Again, I'm just going to the hot topics in the news to give you the information that you need. People are coming because of crises in Central America. There's a huge push factor right now with the hurricanes that have happened and with COVID and the economic crisis that came along with COVID. There's a lot of, people who are in dire situations trying to make a new life for themselves. People are coming because tis the season, it's the spring. Far fewer people come in the winter, far fewer people come in the summer when it's, a dangerous journey, because it's so very hot. More people are coming because there's a backlog. All these people were turned away because of Remain in Mexico or because of there's this whole list of policies that the Trump administration had that turned people away. Metering, Remain in Mexico, Title 42, people were turned away, so now they're trying. And then lastly, they don't actually measure how many people are coming to the border. They measure how many apprehensions, how many people did they have to apprehend at the border. And because of Title 42 and the fact that they're not letting people in, basically the number of apprehensions is artificially high because people are coming, they try on Monday, they're turned back. So they try on Tuesday, they're turned back. So they wait a day, they try on Thursday, they're turned back. Now it looks like there's 3 people who come to the board, but it was the same guy trying 3 times, over and over again. So the repeat apprehensions are really, really making the numbers look inflated. The one thing that doesn't seem to be having an effect is Biden's policies. I don't think that the news is accurate when they say that it's Biden's policies that are making people come, people are coming because they think that Biden will let them in. I don't think that the numbers bear out for that. I think it has more to do with the backlog and more to do with the crisis in Central America. All right, I'm going to end this section by reading you one quote, which is something that I saw in an exhibit at the Tucson Jewish History Museum. And at the Tucson Jewish History Museum does a wonderful job of connecting Jewish history and the lessons of Jewish history to contemporary issues. And so they had a whole exhibit about asylum and the border. And of course, Tucson is very near the border. So this is a quote from the parents of a 6-year-old girl who passed away in June 2019 in the desert in Arizona, trying to cross the border. Our family is heartbroken by the loss of our daughter, Gurpreet Kaur. We wanted a safer and better life for our daughter, and we made the extremely difficult decision to seek asylum here in the United States. We trust that every parent, regardless of origin, color, or creed, will understand that no mother or father ever puts their child in harm's way unless they're desperate. We will carry the burden of the loss of our beloved Gurpreet for a lifetime. But we will also hold on to the hope that America remains a compassionate nation, grounded in the immigrant ideals that make diversity this nation's greatest strength. So this is, a family that had tried to cross the border in Arizona, and a little girl who died in the desert on that journey. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop and take some questions. And then I also know that we don't have much time, but I want to show you a website where you can find ways to be involved with HIAS.
Well, we're certainly glad that HIAS has you, and these refugees are in good hands. And we have sponsored refugees, both legacy congregations and together, and it's a very important topic for us. Does anyone have a question for Rebecca? I just feel like, we're ready to move and go to these meetings or ask for the meetings, whatever we need to do, because I think that many people on this Zoom assume that things, once Biden was in, things would get a little better, and maybe they will, but he's got to move it up his priority list.
They definitely are getting better. It's just, he's got a lot to undo. He's got a lot to, I think that over the course of the Trump administration, there were 1,000 changes made to immigration. So you got to go walk all of those back, right? Some of them were made by executive order. So the ones that are made by executive order, there's got to be an executive order countering it. Some of them were made in the legal system. I mean, there's a lot to do. And I will say that I really appreciate, your commitment of, I think that both of the congregations that came together were very involved. And now you're you've doubled your power. And I think I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think that what I would advise you to do is to start changing your mindset. We're finally, maybe coming out of COVID, seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Within the next year or two, there's going to be refugees arriving in Chicago again, right? I mean, it's taking the Biden administration too long, but it's going to happen, right? And we know the direction they're heading, and it's a good one. So I just want to kind of encourage you to start thinking about that in tangible ways. I mean, who are your volunteers? What are the resources that you've done this in the past? You've done this and you know what you're doing around this, and you could, think about that being something that you do in the future. And then I also want to just show you one good way to find what HIAS is asking for at the moment is to go to this page. I'm putting in the chat, hias.org/take action. And that's where, well, actually it's a web page that I keep updated. I'll also here, why don't I just screen share it? This is a website where we put kind of all of the current things. So here's all the petitions. Look, you guys are all experts on this now. Raise refugee admissions for 2021. Ask your member of Congress to end Title 42. You guys know all these issues now. Remain in Mexico. So there's, these are kind of the different petitions we have. And then we have a lot of different ways people can help. We need air miles right now, so we can unite our clients with their families. If you could donate air miles. I know no one traveled this past year. Maybe you have air miles. There's, purchasing refugee-made products. We've got a lot of HIAS volunteer opportunities right now. So for example, we really need lawyers who can help with pro bono representation of asylum seekers and, and various pro bono projects that are smaller than representing an asylum seeker, which is a huge project. I don't know if you have lawyers in your congregation who are looking for that type of opportunity. We need Spanish-speaking volunteers. So, you know, and then in addition, you've got Highest Chicago located close to you, and they have a number of needs as well. And then I would say, though, that right now, probably the most impactful thing that you could do, I put this website in the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing it. But the most impactful thing that you could do is probably to join Diane and Alan's meeting, and to get to enlist your members of Congress as being, you know, real champions of these issues. Alan and Diane should have the talking points for the meetings. If you don't, let me know. But, you know, it has like, you know, here's the pieces of legislation that are in Congress right now that he should be signed on to if he's not already. And that would be a really good thing to do this month.
We have all of that material, thank you. And we're just waiting for a date.
Yeah.
The other thing, we don't have anything official yet, but my hope and belief is that by the end of this year, we'll be co-sponsoring another family with Refugee One, which is the organization we've worked with in recent times, because unfortunately, Highest Chicago was cut out of the refugee stream at the beginning of the Trump administration. But Refugee One has been a wonderful organization to work with, and between Diane and me and lots of other people who have already volunteered, and perhaps some people who are on the program today who didn't have a chance before, we'll be bringing in more families.
That's wonderful. It's really wonderful.
Right. I thank Rebecca, and I'm glad she's at Highest. I thank Diane and Alan and all of our Tikkun alum and all of our congregation. Great website, and we'll put it in on our Facebook page and get it out there, because there's so much we can do, even, you know, with COVID, without COVID, and it doesn't take that, you know, you can email, you can whatever. And so a great morning to inspire us on to action.
Well,
Thanks very much, Rebecca.
Thank you, Rebecca. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right,
Thank you.
goodbye, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Right. If you need
Bye.
any information on other programs, you know where to get a hold of me. Thank you, Rebecca. Bye-bye.
Bye.